All right. Well, I am so excited to have Kara on the podcast today. And hint, hint, she is the founder of the company you see in my hands. So if you're watching, you know what I'm talking about. Kara, welcome to the Girl Gang podcast. I'm so excited. It's been a long time coming.
I know, and I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm very, very excited.
We're just taking sips of our hint water here. I've got the watermelon flavor with me today, and it tastes so good.
You know what, Amanda? I can't
Oh,
hear you.
Okay, let's pause. Well, welcome to the Girl Gang podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
So thrilled to be here.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan and very excited to be on.
Well, you're really sweet, and I feel like this has been a long time coming.
Yeah, it's I think, I mean, can you believe that it's just, I mean, it's spring, right?
Yeah.
Supposedly, although you and I were just talking about cuckoo weather all over the place.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
My husband's a teacher now, and he just texted me and was like, so they're letting us go home early and we don't have school tomorrow. And I was like, oh geez. So that's Texas weather for you.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely crazy. Well, that'll
Yeah.
be fun. Hopefully you
I
guys can
know.
do something fun.
Have a fun day together. And Lord knows he needs it. I was a teacher for 7 years. I know how it is. So I definitely know he needs a day off. But I'm so excited to talk to you. And it's always so fun to have super unique female founders on the show and in different spaces. A lot of times we talk to people in like the digital online space or service providers, but I love when I get to talk to someone in the physical product space. You are working, in so many different spaces. So give us a little bit, just a quick backstory of you, like what did your entrepreneurial itch come from, and how did you get into what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, how did I get into what I'm doing now? So it's a crazy story. Frequently talk about I didn't know I was going to be an entrepreneur, although it's always great to look back and see how, you know, all of my various experiences kind of made me who I am today. But
Mm-hmm.
I was when I I always did things as a kid. I don't know how far you want me to go back, but
Yeah.
I started summer camp.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in a toy store for when I was 14. I talk about that in my book. That was kind of my
Mm-hmm.
first job and sort of my first kind of itch of working in business in some way. But
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed writing, and when I was in college, that's when I, I was a communications journalism major. I really loved writing a lot, and a few of my friends were finance majors, and
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what they were talking about when they were talking about EBITDA and balance sheets and stuff. And I was just like, whole new world. Yet I liked them a
Yeah.
lot, but I
Yeah.
just thought, what in the world are they talking about? And I've never wanted to feel stupid in any group probably, and so
Same.
I was just like, wait,
Sure.
what
Yeah.
is that? And so I started taking a couple classes with them, and it was really a place where I was probably humbled. I'd been a competitive gymnast growing up, and I was
Really?
plenty humbled in being a gymnast, and there were definitely people who were better than I was, but when I got to those finance classes, I remember thinking, okay, this is real. This is super hard. I'm not used to getting C's in my classes,
Oh
and
gosh, me too.
it was tough. So
Yeah.
anyway, I ended up talking to a professor in my finance classes to try and get my grade up, and he pointed me to a couple of publications. Said, read this when you're not in
Mm-hmm.
class: the Wall Street
Mm-hmm.
Journal and Fortune magazine. And the Wall Street Journal, it was a little different back then. It was
Mm-hmm.
super text based. It's still very text, but Fortune magazine kind of like got me into the groove of it. I started to
Mm.
figure things out like EBITDA and balance sheets and stuff. And And so when I graduated, I actually graduated, and it's still shocking to me, at minor in finance. And when I graduated, I decided I want to go and work for Fortune magazine because those people taught me how to accept finance as something that I could do. And like I learned a lot from them. And so, how do you get a job in finance at Fortune
Mhm.
magazine or
Mhm.
editorial? You
Mhm.
go to New York because that's what the masthead said,
Yeah.
and you write to the managing editor of Fortune magazine.
Mhm.
And so it's a humorous story that I've told many times. That is, I showed up at the HR department. I wanted a job at Fortune. I was going to go get that job. And my friends said, "How are you going to get it?" "I don't know. I'm going to
I'm
go
just
figure
gonna
it out."
go. Yeah.
And that never happened. But I ended up uh, getting a job instead at one of their sister companies that was in the same building, at Time Magazine, which
Mm.
pretty good, right? Great
Yeah.
brand and
Pretty great.
awesome.
Yeah.
And worked there for a couple of years, ended up getting recruited out of there to go and work for a late stage startup. I still laugh about that. That was my first taste of working with entrepreneurs in a
Yeah.
startup at a company
Mm.
called CNN. CNN was in like 40% of households. It was
Yeah.
in the US, it was like 12% outside of the US. And Ted Turner would, grace us with his presence here and there. He lived in Atlanta, but he'd come to New York. And
Mhm.
it's something I share with people a lot about entrepreneurs now, and sort of the life of an entrepreneur, and certainly my own life. But
Mhm.
watching Ted Turner like walk around and really put a stake in the ground around the world is going to have news, and they need to have consistent news. And it doesn't
Mhm.
matter that you can't come into the US or you can't go to
Mhm.
certain countries, whatever it is, we all live in the same world. And there were days when I didn't know whether or not CNN would be throughout the world, right?
Mhm.
But Ted, you really believed, he had his best poker face, and he believed that CNN would be throughout the world. And that is the sign, no matter what industry you're in, of an incredible founder and CEO. I'm sure Ted had days when he doubted himself, but he had to carry the torch, right?
You
And
probably
he had
didn't let everybody else know, like, hey guys, today, not sure. I don't know if it's gonna keep working.
totally. And
Yeah.
and so be having that experience, that was my first experience, and I happened to be there really when CNN was put on the map, and saw their hockey stick
Mhm.
in the early 90s, when there was a ruler in another part of the world who found out um, that their country was being bombed. And
Mm.
so they called the White House and said, "I'm watching CNN right now." He was of the 12% outside of the US that was watching CNN. And he said, "I see that I'm being bombed." And that was, the day that startup took off. And so being able to be there and experience that, all of a sudden, the people who wouldn't see us to talk about advertising, like, they're like,
Starting to
"No,
listen.
I only want to be on ABC or NBC." All of a sudden, they were like, "Wait a minute. Okay, I get it now.
Hmm.
So we want to advertise with you." So saw that.
Mhm.
I ended up meeting my husband, my soon-to-be husband, in New York, in a bar. My kids love that. That
Love
bar is
it.
still there. It's called Down the Hatch, and
Love it. I love that.
met in a bar, and ended up. He wanted to do technology law, so that got us out to San Francisco.
Mm.
Nobody. He was graduating from law school. All of the law firms in New York were like, "If you want to do internet law, go west." And so we went west and came to San Francisco. I didn't know anybody. I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to work in media, because it may sound crazy to some people, but media was really, especially back in the 90s, it was all done out of New York. Like everything else
Yeah.
was like satellite,
Yep.
local. And I didn't
Mhm.
really want to do that. Or I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. But so when I got to San Francisco, I really was looking for kind of where do I want to go? And
Yeah.
the only brand that kind of resonated with me, and I always think about brands, and even back then, I tied them to entrepreneurs and sort of stories,
Yep.
was this guy, Steve Jobs at Apple.
This guy.
This guy, right?
Just some guy.
And he was going through his own turmoil with Apple, but I was lucky enough to have an Apple computer when I was in college. I'd saved my babysitting and waitressing money, and I had bought one with doing all my papers, my journalism papers. And so
Did you
when
have one of the colored ones?
I did with the cute little
What
apple,
color
and
was yours?
well, no,
Oh, I
back
was wondering,
then,
when did those colored ones come
I
out?
don't those were a little bit later.
I'm trying to
I
think.
actually did have one later, but the first ones were, I mean, they were really small, not as small as they are today, but
Mm-hmm.
they almost look like an egg. They
Yeah.
were just,
Yep.
you know,
I
off
remember.
white, and they had that cute little apple on it, and
Yeah.
I loved it. And I was one of the few people, especially women, nobody
Yeah.
had
Just got a
computers,
yeah,
right,
just got a
and people would
computer.
just be like, what is that?" And I just
Yeah.
didn't wanna go to we had a computer resources room in
Mhm.
college, and it was a
Mhm.
hassle to go to. Anyway,
Sure.
so when I figured out that Apple and Steve Jobs was in the Bay Area, I then quickly figured out that Cupertino was really far from San Francisco where I was living, so I thought, I
Hmm.
don't wanna commute every single day, like,
Mhm.
100 miles. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just a lot. That's just not even
Not
really
an option.
possible. But when I was looking for this, next opportunity, I had stumbled upon this little startup that was called To Market, that was a spin out of Apple, that 5 guys who had worked for Steve, and they were doing this thing called CD-ROM shopping. All I heard, I didn't know what CD-ROM was, but
The
I
shopping part.
I thought shopping. I can do shopping. I'm
Yeah.
really good at shopping,
I'm
and I
fantastic
can
at
probably
shopping.
do that. And anything that is even sort of related to Apple and Steve Jobs and shopping, I thought, "Oh, that's really cool." So I cold called the guy who was in the research article.
I love
Um,
this. I love your gumption because that's how I would be. I'd be like, I'll just call him. I'll just
I'll
show
just
up.
call
Like,
him.
I'll just, what else do you do?
And the company was based in this town called San Mateo, which was still like 25 miles from San Francisco, but not 100 miles.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'm like, okay,
Mm.
I'm just going to go have coffee with this guy. And it was funny because when I showed up for coffee, he invited me to have coffee. He
Mhm.
was intrigued because I worked for this startup on the East Coast called
Mhm.
CNN.
Mhm.
And the first thing that he wanted to talk about was Ted Turner,
Yeah.
because he had worked for Steve Jobs. It was like, "Oh, Steve? Oh yeah. I mean, he's really brilliant. He's kind of crazy."
But it was
And
kind of
I'm like,
old
"That
news to
is
him.
just like that's just like Ted."
Yeah.
Right? Like he's just normal, and we were just laughing, and then we started talking about this whole CD-ROM shopping thing. But I really think that the fact that I it didn't even matter what I did for CNN, the fact that I worked for a company that had a founder, and the
Mhm.
founder story was kind of the pull to even allow me to have coffee.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so I end up having coffee, and then ended up having another cup of coffee with them, and I got this job offer. And I'm like,
So what was CD-ROM shopping?
so CD-ROM shopping, it's actually a really, really crazy
Sounds like
concept.
fashion retail shopping, but for CDs. I don't know.
The biggest problem, totally dating myself here, this is 1994,
Yep.
and not to pitch my book, but you should
No,
definitely
yeah,
read
we're
my
gonna
book
talk about the
because
book.
there are a lot of people actually that read this 94 to 2001
Mhm.
timeframe that I
Mhm.
talk about the CD-ROM shopping, and then um, through my next startup, which was America Online. It's like it's historical, and I think it's kind of telling for a lot of stuff that's going on right now with
Mm.
Web3 and NFTs, and sort of when you
Mhm.
look back on history, it's a different time, obviously, but the changes were big, and I think that
Yeah.
it's very, very interesting. And anyway, so CD-ROM shopping. So basically, in 1994, there was this thing called dial-up service. So you
Yes.
actually had to connect with your phone to the internet.
I
And
remember it makes me think of the beginning of the movie You've Got Mail.
totally,
And
totally.
we had the startup modem, and I can hear the sound in my head, and I could probably like hum the pitches,
Yeah. And
for
so
word for word.
and basically, like, if you were connecting to the internet, it was so slow and there was no possible way that you could have graphics. Like, forget about
Mhm.
what we're doing right now with
Yeah.
video. No way.
Yeah.
And so you would have graphics and your computer would freeze. Everything was super text based. And I think that was the thing that they were really intrigued when they were interviewing me, because there weren't very many women that sort of got this concept. And again, I wasn't an engineer. I had
Right.
no idea what I was talking
You
about.
just started kind of putting yourself in these spaces.
Yeah, but also do you remember CompuServe and
Yeah.
Prodigy? I mean, these are early. So there was CompuServe, there was Prodigy, there was America Online. Steve Case probably doesn't want to hear it, but like, America Online was a distant third to CompuServe and Prodigy. And so when I went in to talk to them about the CD-ROM product, this is a little known Steve Jobs idea that was incubated inside of Apple. But Steve had this brilliant idea that if you put the graphics on a disk and you told the consumer to insert the disk in the machine, it became known as upgrade, right? So all these consumers were sticking disks in the machine. And what they were doing was they were taking the graphics and they were downloading them on their hard drive. But consumers didn't know that they were doing that. And so then when you
Mhm.
connected to the internet, you had all the graphics on your hard drive. And I was like, this is mind blowing,
Mind blown. Yeah.
right? Right? I was like, nobody cares how or why it's working, but it's like it's working. And
And
yet,
here in 2022, we're like, what?
yeah,
You had to do what?
yeah, and so again, like, you still had to fight with your brother in the next room and on the chat room,
Yeah.
right? And disconnecting you from your services, all that stuff was
Mhm.
going on. But again, it was a maker, it was like a go around, and this was
Mhm.
a Steve Jobs idea. And so
Mhm.
again, the thing that I think they liked most about when I was talking to them about this idea was that I wasn't technical. I was a consumer and I wanted
Yes.
this. And
Yep.
I was also a woman
Mhm.
who they didn't see very often in the world of the internet, right?
Yeah.
And I was sitting here, I was like a focus group for them.
Yeah, you
And
were
I
a
was saying, "Oh, I totally
completely
get it."
different person for them.
So now the shopping, what they had done to try and prove the concept was they had taken catalogs like J. Crew and
JC
LLB
Penney or whatever.
and put them on this disc. And again, the images were being downloaded onto the consumer's computer. So
Mhm.
you didn't have, like, pricing changes or whatever until the next disc came, and then you got like
Mhm.
the new
New
thing.
catalog kind of thing.
Anyway, so I was just like, this is so cool. This is like the future. I mean, this is the start of direct to consumer. And
It's exactly what I was
I
about
mean,
to
we called
say.
it online shopping, but it
Yeah.
was like, it really was the start of this
Mhm.
thing. So I figured eventually they're going to figure me out that I have no idea what I'm talking about, and they're going to fire me. But
I
in
feel
the
like everybody
meantime,
has those feelings, which I
right?
want to revisit.
Yeah, like, I really thought for sure I'm gonna be out once they
Mhm. Mhm.
understand that I have no idea
No clue.
what I'm talking about. And I said, "What exactly would I do
Mhm.
in this job that you're gonna give me?" There's 5 guys. It wasn't in a garage, but it was in this tiny office in San Mateo, and they all seem really cool. Oh, and the other thing is everybody in New York that I had worked with had really nice clothes. These guys were all wearing jeans and T-shirts. I'm like, "This is really interesting." I
Yeah.
mean, they all seem really smart and everybody gets along and they don't really have desks or cubicles or anything like
But
that.
yeah.
It's just like everybody in a room, and it was just interesting.
Yeah.
So I get this job. My job is basically to build a revenue model for this little disc.
And is that
And
had something you had been doing before? Had you had experience with building?
well,
You'd
I
been
think
watching these founders, but
I think the thing about CNN that they were most interested in, and again, like totally looking back on sort of historical stuff, that, cable was in like 40% of households. It
hmm
wasn't the only reason why I had cable is I lived in New York City and
hmm
I couldn't get television reception because of the tall buildings unless I
uh-huh.
had cable.
hmm
But like cable was, I mean, we didn't have the same like Nielsen numbers and as the networks did. And so we were
Mm.
sort of telling people lots of people are watching CNN, including the guy whose country is being bombed. I mean, like of course, who cares about the numbers? This is you know, this
This
is
is
the
important.
reality. I don't know
hmm
why there's no numbers, but it's happening.
hmm
And so they're like, if you can sell that to advertising agencies, you can sell this.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think that's why they hired me. So,
Yeah.
anyway, my job was to go into these catalogers. And I then said, okay, well, who do I call next? Well, in San Francisco, there's this company called The Gap. So I call up, I go call up Mickey Drexler's office. He's the CEO at the time. And I'm like, hi, I'm from this company called Two Market. We incubated inside of Apple, and I'm going to teach you how to go online. He's like, come in. And
Yeah.
friends of mine who I was meeting, they were like, how in the world did you
Are
get
you?
into Mickey
Yeah.
Drexler's office? I'm like, and this is a lesson that I share with people a lot
Yeah.
that, you know, when you can actually make people smarter, right? And you're somewhat humorous. Like you laugh at yourself. You're like, you just go in and you're educating, right? And you're
hmm
learning. I mean, Mickey is an incredibly smart guy. He wants to learn at any age. He doesn't care that I didn't have any
Yep.
experience, that I was like, he figured, okay, I'm going to see what she's all about for like an hour and see if I'm going to learn anything. He wanted to learn about the new wave of, retail. So anyway, I went
Yeah.
in and after a year, we were populating this disc, and one of our investors, America Online, uh, acquired us. We needed
Yeah.
capital, and they said it's going to be easier just to acquire you. So they did. And then they came to me. I was living in San Francisco. I wasn't movable. My husband had passed the California bar exam. He was working for a company called Netscape. And I was
Love
like,
it.
yeah.
Remember
And
the days of
so
Netscape.
yeah, and so I said, there's catalogers and retailers all over the country, so I'm happy to get on a plane and commute, but I kind of need to be. I mean,
Here.
this is before people were even talking about remote work, but I was just
Oh,
never,
absolutely.
never around. Anyway, so 7 years later, I'm running $1 billion business for AOL. I was
With
their
AOL.
youngest vice president. I was, one of the few women at that
I was gonna
level.
say, were you still surrounded by mostly men at that time? I'm assuming
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've always worked
I
in
think
an
so.
environment where, and again, there were a lot of women, but there weren't women sort of at a VP level.
Right.
Um, and so, anyway, long
Yeah.
winded story. So, ended up doing shopping, ran all the shopping and e-commerce partnerships. I was teaching people all over the US who had worked for AOL, um, how to sell into this new world that really wasn't measured. It was based
The
on
earliest
clicks.
stages of e-commerce.
Yeah, it was based on, audiences, where they're coming in from, like what browser are they using. I mean, we basically were picking up on whatever we could,
Their
and
habits. Yeah.
creating a story around, people who were coming in through Explorer versus, people who are coming in through, Netscape.
Netscape.
They were more valuable. And exactly. And again, creating these stories about the consumers,
hmm
and then also working super closely with the different retailers that were out there. anyway, so many crazy stories just in building that. My favorite one uh, was when we couldn't find a book retailer who wanted to work with us. We had been turned down by Borders and Barnes and Noble. And so there was this little guy in Seattle who had started this bookstore. This is like 1997, Jeff Bezos. And he was just books, right?
Yep.
And he was kind of like a little uh short, not short like in terms of short height
Height.
wise, but short. I mean, he wasn't the kindest and gentlest
He was
person
pretty
when
kind
I
of all business, dry.
yeah, and sort of nerdy and had a funny laugh and whatever, but he agreed to meet with me. And anyway, it's a crazy, I can tell you the story, but it's a crazy story. We ended up building bookshelves together and so many
Just no
things.
big deal. Super casual.
I mean, it's funny to like think back on it
Sure.
now. So, but anyway, so did all of that. And then when I left AOL in 2001, that's when I really left because it was $1 billion business. I never thought it would be $1 billion business and direct to consumer. No one thought it would be that. And for me, I wanted to spend more time with my family in San Francisco. I
Mm-hmm.
had young kids. I had 3 at the time. I have 4 now. And I didn't want to be on an airplane all the time. I wanted to enjoy San
Sure.
Francisco. And that's when I really started thinking about not starting a company, but instead my health. Like
Mm,
I felt like I was paying more attention now that I had young kids. Like I felt
sure.
I got to be responsible. Like
I gotta be around for a while.
I got to be around, but also I've got to, make sure I'm putting the right things in their body. Like
Yeah.
and I still didn't really think, frankly, about myself and sort of how I was
Mm,
treating myself. But then I don't know. I think this light bulb went off at some point when I looked down at my diet soda and I thought, here I am, like preaching about health. And there's all these ingredients in this product that I would never give my
to
kids.
my
Why am
kids.
I
Yeah.
okay for putting it in my body?
Yeah.
And so that's when I decided to give it up for a couple of weeks just to see what would
Sure.
happen. Maybe nothing would happen. I had been having really bad stomach aches. I had developed terrible adult acne, which I didn't even have as a
Mm,
teenager, never connected the two things. I thought diet equated to health, that there was some
yeah.
research behind that.
So
Um,
much more.
right. And so that's when, after 2.5 weeks, I woke up and had sort of been through this whole episode where I could finally see clearly.
No
I
fog.
was no fog. My skin was clear. I lost over 20 pounds in 2.5 weeks, which was
Jeez Louise.
insane.
What
And
was your diet drink of choice? I have to know.
Diet Coke.
Okay.
So,
Classic
yeah.
diet. Yeah.
So the Pepsi people love me saying this, that I was never, a diet Pepsi addict. I was
I
a
just, yeah.
Diet Coke addict.
I was the same way. I was huge Diet Coke drinker until about 4 years ago. And I'll have it like at Christmas because
Yeah,
my grandma has Diet Coke, just cases of
so
it,
funny.
right? And it's just there. And I remember growing up with my mom in the 90s, they would chug a Diet Coke, go to a jazzercise class, go get another Diet Coke at Sonic. And it was never a huge deal. And I think that's part of what I would love to hear from you too. You start to think about your kids. American like food and culture and the food pyramid and all that stuff. I mean, especially now we're finding it's kind of garbage.
Total garbage, yeah. And I just never, again, because I was drinking diet, I thought I was doing just fine. But when I really started to focus and read ingredients
Mhm.
as I was trying to raise my young kids, I think that that's when I kind of became educated. And and again, I had more time on my hands. I wasn't
Mhm.
working for a couple of years. And that's when I really started thinking, gosh, I bet there's a lot of people who don't know what I know right now. maybe haven't had this epiphany. I know lots of people who were drinking diet soda. I also felt like there was a lot of trust in the word diet. Maybe it's also
Yes.
low fat and vitamin, that
Yes.
there's this like, you know, research team that does it all and it must be
The
me.
low
It can't,
fat. No.
right. And it can't possibly be them or some big farce. It has to be the way that it has to be something I'm doing. And so as I was going through this process, I thought, okay, it's all great. I'm not going to go back to drinking diet soda, but
Mhm.
plain water was so boring. So I started slicing up fruit and throwing it in water.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then after a while, people would see me and they'd say,
What are
"What
you
kind of
doing?
fruit do you have in your water?"
Yeah.
And I was just, I mean, they'd be really nosy, right? They're like, "Wait, what is that?" It's, "Oh, you have blackberries? Do you ever have blueberries?" I mean, people would just, there was this constant
People are
engagement,
curious. Yeah.
yeah, with what I was doing. And so at some point I thought there has to be this product on the shelf already. I just have missed it because I was
Sure.
always going down the beverage aisle and
Yep.
drinking picking up the Diet Coke cases. And I was shocked when I finally looked for a product like Hint. Everything had sugar or these
Something in
diet
it.
sweeteners in it.
Yep.
And then again, I'm living in San Francisco. Then I looked in New York and
Mhm.
I looked everywhere. In fact, I was on an interview yesterday with
Mm.
somebody in Europe and I was saying I happened to have a trip to Europe that summer and I looked in Europe because I thought maybe we just don't
Maybe
have it for some
yeah.
reason and I'm just not finding it. But that's when I thought, okay, well, while I'm not working, maybe I should just get this product launched, because not because I wanted to be an
While I'm not
entrepreneur,
working.
or
Just no big deal.
not because, yeah, like not because w- you know, really thought that this was going to take on the beverage industry or big soda or anything,
Mhm.
but because I had this idea and this passion and this mission. And I didn't think about it too as, as, uh, you know, it's my time. Here I've been working for all these entrepreneurs and I can go do what they can do. I felt like if I could actually get this product out there, I could help a lot of people. And this is
Give
almost
people a good
17
option.
years now. I still believe that. I
Yeah.
mean, I still believe that if you've got an idea and you can actually get it out there and
Mhm.
launch it, then and it can help a lot of people, you should do that.
So when you were home for those couple of years, was there any part of you, and I'm sure, I think if you are if you have the entrepreneurial DNA, you're kind of, I was joking the other day, like, here's business idea number one, here's business idea number two, were you at home and were you bored? Were you wanting something else? Were you looking for someone else, something else? Were you thinking, oh, maybe when the kids are older, I'll go back to work? Or was this just truly like passion project turned brand and business?
I think I I never thought that I'd start something in the food and beverage industry,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I didn't really even think about myself as launching a company. I mean, here I had worked
Hmm.
for America Online and I had watched it scale, but that seemed like a really scary thing to go launch your own company and,
Yeah.
you know, do what Steve Case did or Ted Turner or Steve Jobs. I mean, it just seemed really big.
Mm-hmm.
And that and I think though that I just thought, and it's something I, also share with entrepreneurs too. Sometimes if you think too much, you won't get started. Right? I mean, it's just if you get yourself overwhelmed, you're like, "Oh my
I would
god,"
I
like,
would venture to say anytime you think too much, you won't do anything.
you won't do anything,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that, I call it flying the airplane as you're building it. I mean, I
Yep.
think it's just you have to go get started, because the other thing that will happen is that you may find out that you don't wanna do it, or you may find out that you were going right, and then you've gotta turn left along the way. It's not exactly, and I think that that's something that I share. with people on about my entrepreneurial journey is that, the ability to sort of be flexible as an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
um, there's way easier ways to make money for sure,
Yeah.
than be an entrepreneur. But I think it's also, as you're it can be very rewarding. It's like doing a daily puzzle where you're constantly working at something where
Yeah.
people like take the puzzle pieces away from you as
Yeah.
you're building them. And
And
you're
you
like,
gotta
wait, what? You
figure it
can't
out.
do that.
Yeah.
And then you figure out you don't need them. How else can you go around that in order to
Mhm.
make up for all of those things? And then I think probably the most rewarding thing that I really loved, you talked about a physical product. When people can actually hold on to your product, here I had worked in bits and bytes forever, and people said, "Oh my God, I love AOL. It's so easy to connect," and that was all true.
You can just
But
show it on your phone back then.
yeah, but people still to this day walk up to me,
Mhm.
with their bottle of Hint. And I mean, they hold it like it's like a baby, and they're just like, I love it. I drink it every
I
day.
love it so much.
Right? And so that as a founder, that as a CEO of a company
Mhm.
it's a pretty special thing. And to
Yeah.
know, going back to my original mission to know that you did something that is actually helping people,
With
that's
a
the other thing.
purpose.
And I think that different from, maybe launching a soda, right? Where it tastes good or whatever. People don't I can't imagine that people are walking up to Coca-Cola executives saying, "Oh my God,
Thank you so
your product has
much.
helped me so much," right?
Yeah.
I mean, they might say they love the product, but to actually create a product in any industry that actually helps people
Yeah.
is a really special feeling.
It's funny because I feel like a lot of people have gotten COVID, and my dad had COVID back, actually we all did back in mid or late 2020, and he was a avid Coca-Cola drinker, like
Mm.
1, 2, 3 Cokes a day. And then he got COVID, some people lose their taste, things like that. Got better. He can no longer taste Coca-Cola.
Hmm.
And so my mom and I were like, "Oh, we're kind of glad," because,
Yeah, you
like
quit.
we've
Yeah,
been trying to get him to not, like, "Dad, let's drink water. Let's drink something else." And then, I think about, I just was thinking about these people as you were talking. My mother-in-law, hates the taste of water. Hates it, hates it, hates it. And so she has to find things like, um, Hint. I actually we've been hinting at, I just love making puns with Hint, so forgive me, but,
yeah, love it.
um, she uses, like, flavoring in her water, like anything, but because we've been trying to encourage her, like, just drink something, like, drink just not, sweet tea. We live in the South. She lives in Arkansas.
Totally. Yeah.
Sweet tea, like a freaking 2 cups of sugar for a pitcher of sweet tea. Oh my gosh. And so absolutely. I think too, especially I can speak on my behalf for the millennial generation, we want to look for brands and products and services that have a purpose,
Mhm.
that help people, that have a potentially ethical background, that have a great story. I know for
Totally.
me, I'm more prone to buy from someone or a brand if I connect with the story of, like, whose idea was this? Who came up with this? Wow, that's incredible. They started this out of XYZ. I want to buy that, not the million other brands that are on the shelf at Kroger. Um and I think that's it's just really important to our generation and to a lot of people, despite if it is more expensive or
Yeah.
less available. I don't know. Do you see that too?
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I mean, I think that the story, for so many brands is critical to the
Has to
consumer
be.
today, and I think that in the case of Hint, it's not more expensive, to
Right, exactly.
buy the product. I think that the biggest problem for us over the years, and certainly if I would have known, I probably wouldn't have launched Hint, is just dealing with, the big guys, right? Everybody's got their big guys in every single industry. I
Yeah.
mean, we have the Cokes and the Pepsis and the
Yep.
Nestle's, and they're trying to grow their beverages, and
Yeah.
they have longer history with the
Mhm.
Krogers, and
Mhm.
so, we finally started getting into the Krogers and the
Yeah.
Costcos over the years, and today Hint is the largest privately held non-alcoholic beverage in the country that doesn't have a relationship with Coke, Pepsi, or Dr. Pepper, Snapple. We have
Love it.
big direct to consumer business as well. And,
Yep.
there are many people who know about Hint
Mhm.
because of my story.
Yeah.
And it's, I didn't intend to tell the story
Mhm.
as a way to get the millennials to like us. There, I've
Right.
definitely talked to entrepreneurs about that. Like,
Yeah.
how do we trick people? Like, you
No.
can't be an authentic brand and share a story that isn't true, right? And I did it initially because people didn't understand what unsweetened flavored water was. And so I would
Right.
talk to them about how I had been addicted to diet sweeteners. And then I
Yeah.
got off of diet sweeteners and wanted to just have water that tasted better.
Yeah.
And so telling my story from my kitchen, from coming from a different industry,
Yeah.
tech, I had
Yeah.
no idea what I was doing. There were many people who would tell me in the early days, "Don't actually tell people that you didn't come from the beverage industry." And I'd be like, "But I didn't,"
Why? Yeah.
And I
That
mean, it
gets
was
me.
no, totally. And
Yeah.
I'd be like, I know what I know because I'm curious and I'm a consumer."
I love how honest you are about this, and that's what I am all about, and what this show is all about is the honesty and the truth behind things. You said something about marketing a second ago, and I think there are a lot of people listening, and myself included, wanting to hear your thoughts on this. Like you were saying, they were like, how do we trick people
Yeah.
into XYZ? And marketing should not be about lying. It should be the
No.
exact opposite. It should be about the truth. And I think there's a fine line between, we are seeing a lot of creators and personal brands online today be open and vulnerable and honest about their stories. And I think there's a fine line between, you know, airing out your dirty laundry and being honest about your
Yeah.
story. But that's what marketing should be about. I tell people my background is an educator. I was a music teacher for 7 years. So, in all things business, and as a business coach now, it has been through experience and trial and error, and because I was curious and because I did things to learn. And I'm not like embarrassed that I didn't go to business school, right? Or I
No.
don't have a marketing degree. And so I'd love to hear like your thoughts on that, especially coming from so many different experiences in your career.
Yeah. It's there, it's probably a longer conversation, but it's interesting.
Probably.
I mean, I had so many opportunities along the way. I remember a bunch of my friends were going to business school when I was working at CNN, and I really every day I would wake up and I would just be thinking, I'm learning every day,
Yeah.
right? And working for somebody like Ted Turner, um, not directly, but just
Around.
learning, right? I just felt a different type of enthusiasm and energy that my friends that were taking off from their companies and going to business school weren't getting. And
Yeah.
I really felt like all along the way I was really good at finding places where I was going to learn, where I felt like they could fire me tomorrow and they'll like figure out that I have no idea what I'm talking about, and that I'm a little out of my element. And
Mhm.
honestly, like that's I mean, people look at that as risky, but I would look at those opportunities as places where I felt really uncomfortable when I walked in, like, what am I
Mhm.
going to do here? Everybody else is smarter than I am. But I've always wanted to put myself into those positions because
Uh-huh.
that's where I feel like I know what that bar is and I want to keep getting there,
You wanna
right?
That's where you wanna be because you know that's where you're gonna grow.
I'm going to grow, right? And where there's a lot of people who want to come into places and they want to be, the smartest one in the room. I'm still to this day, I seek out places where, and smart is probably not necessarily the best
Sure.
way to describe it, but the most knowledgeable person in the room. And I think like I would much rather, you know, pick up a magazine where I know nothing about something, that they're talking about, and then all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh, wow, that was a really interesting article." Not
Yeah.
something that I know tons about.
Right.
And so the same with any role that I would be taking, the same with Mickey Drexler, right? Mickey Drexler would take meetings with me because I was telling him something he didn't know. And
Yeah.
I think like the best leaders today, the best, entrepreneurs, CEOs, however you want to, look at it, are that's who they are. They want to learn things. They want to keep upping their own bar.
Mhm.
And they want to surround themselves with people that are going to know something they don't.
Yeah.
And I think that is, I mean, it was the same. It was the way back then that it is today. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's exactly the same. It's just that different situations, I guess,
Yeah,
present
different
themselves.
settings. I think there is so much fear in especially the online entrepreneur space, which is so weird, by the
Yeah.
way. It's just weird. If you're a coach, a service provider, an agency owner, you're working remote, you're doing everything online, everything digitally, and a lot of the in person component is taken away, or you're not in a physical product and things like that. So you sit online, you watch so many other people, you're following all of these other people on social media, and you start to feel very inadequate. And you start to compare yourself and you start to think, well, instead of like having that positive outlook of, I want to put myself in rooms where I can learn from everyone and whatever, we on the flip side start to think, well, I would kind of like to be the smartest person in the room. I want people to think highly of me. I want to be, you know, I want people to call upon me for XYZ. And because this is my whole thing I want to hear your take on the entrepreneurial journey, lifestyle, whatever, is becoming so incredibly glamorized
Hmm.
that I think it's very detrimental to newer entrepreneurs and already existing
Yeah.
it's just kind of been um a little bit of a dumpster fire
Well,
these
I think that the
days.
key thing to know, and I think that part of what I wanted, to share really in my journey, and hopefully lots of people are getting out of it, is that being an entrepreneur is tough. And like as I said earlier, there's it's not all glamour, right? It can be really
Mm-mm.
that like the failure rates are super high. You hear a lot of no's. You have a lot of doubters, right? You get
Mm-hmm.
your head gets a hold of you, right? And with your own doubts. And so, but if you can actually do something that you think is actually going to make a difference, and truly make a difference in someone's life, like changing someone's health, or um, you know, really making something easier in some way, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
then you should go try it. And as
Mm-hmm.
I always say to people, what's the worst that can happen? And so I think looking at measuring exactly what your risk really is,
Mm-hmm.
I usually look at it financially. Like,
Yep,
how long is it going
I
to
do
take
too.
for me to kind of recoup if this was a really bad idea? Or are there
Mm-hmm.
are there you know, exits in the haunted house, that if it gets too scary that I can
Do I
like
have a way
exit
out?
out, right? And so that's how I look at it more than anything.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna have uh to close up in a few minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I just
Yeah.
realized what time it was. I've been
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I'm gonna wrap
so
up here in a second. I'll
psyched
have her cut
about,
this.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
super psyched about, talking to everybody
Yeah.
and sharing this stuff.
Well, let's wrap up here. I love your take on everything and just how open and honest you are. This is what we need to hear more, especially from people like you. And so, um, let's talk about your book really quick, about your book
Yeah.
Undaunted. And obviously they're going to hear more of you and how you're talking about your journey and your take on things and your advice. But what can they expect from the book?
Yeah, well, I've touched on a couple of,
Mm-hmm.
the things and the stories, but I think more than anything, I think more people need to hear the real deal on
Yeah,
being an entrepreneur and sort of the challenges along the way.
me
You
too.
get bits of my husband in this book as well. That everybody loves Theo by the time they finish the book, because he was our chief operating officer of Hint, and he's hysterical. He, as I mentioned earlier, is a recovering um, attorney from
Recovering attorney.
Netscape, from intellectual property attorney. So definitely, whether you're an entrepreneur thinking about being an entrepreneur, know some entrepreneurs, it's a great book
Yeah,
to read or listen on Audible,
yeah.
as well. So, but thank you so much
Thank
for
you. Yes,
talking about it. I appreciate it.
absolutely. And you guys can go find Kara Goldin on Instagram, and her book is everywhere. Um, Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Could have talked about this forever and really appreciate it. And thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.